Hello everyone, welcome back to the videos on registration under GST. So we are back with the part 2 discussion on section 25 procedures for registration. In the previous video we were discussing about, we had a very brief introductory discussion about the procedures to be followed, and we went through 6 main points in which we discussed about the voluntary registration, separate registration, etc. So today we will continue the discussion on section 25, that is procedures for registration, and in that we will discuss the rest of the portions or the rest of the provisions related to the procedures for registration. Okay. So the seventh concept or seventh point to be remembered is regarding suo motu registration by the proper officer. So before going to suo motu registration, I would like to tell about, or I would like to discuss about the proper officer. So who is a proper officer? So in case of GST registration, for all the compliance of the registration provisions, there is one person who looks into everything, whether it is according to the provisions or not, or whether the person who is liable to get registered is moving according to the provisions or not. So that person who is appointed to look upon all these provisions relating to a registered person is known as a proper officer. So in our case, we will be using this proper officer term frequently. He is the person who is responsible for looking and making sure that everything is going appropriately and well and good. Okay, so now we will come to suo motu registration by the proper officer. So when a particular person who is liable to get registered under the registration under GST Act files an application for a registration, we will have a very long discussion or a detailed discussion about application for registration under Rule 8 in the coming videos. Okay, so after a person gives an application, a person who is liable to get registered gives an application for registration under Rule 8. There is a particular person who is appointed for looking after all these things. So that is Mr. Proper Officer, Mr. or Miss Proper Officer. So this proper officer conducts an inspection or search or any other proceedings related to this registration. So he wants to make sure that all provisions and all forms are submitted correctly and everything is going well and good appropriately. Okay, so after an inquiry, inspection, search or any other proceedings under the Act, and if such proper officer finds that a person who was liable to registration under the Act has failed to apply for such registration, a particular person is liable to get registered but he has failed to apply for registration, in that case this proper officer may register that particular person. Okay, so that particular person on a temporary basis, and also after that temporary registration basis he may issue an order in a prescribed form. So this type of temporary registration is known as suo motu registration. Okay, and after granting this registration on a temporary basis, that particular registered person shall either submit an application for registration in the prescribed form within 90 days of this temporary registration, or he may file an appeal against such temporary registration. So either after this particular grant of temporary registration, that particular registered person can submit an application for registration within 90 days of this temporary registration, or he has also an opportunity or an option to file an appeal against such temporary registration. Okay, so in India, I think you are aware about the judiciary system in India. Same like that, for GST purpose also there is a appellate authorities and all. Okay, so in this case this particular registered person may file an appeal to the appellate authority, and if that appellate authority thinks that okay, this particular person is liable to be registered, he filed an appeal against that suo motu registration, but still all the circumstances show that he has the liability to registration. Okay, and if that is the case, the appellate authority will tell the person that you should submit an application within 30 days. Okay, so in case if the appellate authority upholds the liability to registration, then application for registration shall be submitted within 30 days from the date of issuance of order of the appellate tribunal. So this is the procedure, or this is the provision regarding suo motu registration. Okay, so remember there is a proper officer for this case, for the cases under registration, and suo motu registration is like a temporary registration given by a proper officer if he finds that a person who was liable to get registered under the GST Act has not done so. He may grant a temporary registration, and after granting this temporary registration, that particular registered person, okay, that particular registered person who was liable to get registered can either submit an application within 90 days of this uh, temporary registration, or he can make an appeal against such temporary registration. So the appeal is received by the appellate authority, and if the appellate authority feels that he is a person who has the liability for registration, then they may issue an order. So within 30 days of the issuance of the order, this particular person need to make an application for registration. Okay. Then the eighth point deals about the procedure for registration, that is part 1. The beginning, how does the procedure for registration starts? Okay, so whoever is the person who is liable to get registered, and also the persons who are seeking the voluntary registration, before making an application for registration, he should declare his PAN number, that is permanent account number, mobile number, email address, or the state or union territory, etc., in a particular format or in a particular prescribed form. That is part A of form GST REG01 on GST Common Portal. So in the last video I mentioned that for each and every process, for application, for amendment, for cancellation, for each and every process, or for issuing each and every notice or order, there is a particular prescribed format. Okay, so this is the first prescribed format, that is part A of form GST REG01, where the person who is liable to get registered should declare his PAN number, mobile number, email address, and state or union territory. This is the first step. And after declaring all these things, he may be granted a temporary reference number, or TRN. Okay, a temporary reference number will be generated and communicated to this particular person, and it shall also be validated through mobile number and email address. So same as in the case, if we want to purchase a particular product in an online shop or in an e-commerce website, there may be validation of email address and mobile number. Okay, so in the same manner, here also there will be a validation of the mobile number and email address. Then, using this reference number, the applicant shall electronically submit application in part B of application form along with specified documents at the common portal. So, at the time of making an admission or applying for an admission in a particular educational institution, they may insist an applicant to upload certain documents, for example, say the mark sheet of class 10 or mark sheet of class 12 if you are applying for a bachelor degree program. So in the same manner, here also certain specified documents will be asked by the GST Common Portal. So this applicant can electronically submit the application in part B of form REG01 with all these documents in the common portal. Okay. Then this particular person who is liable has made an application online, and after making that electronic application, the application will be received. The application will be received. On receipt of such application, an acknowledgement in the prescribed form shall be issued to the applicant electronically. Okay, so in this case of casual taxable person, there is a slight change in the provision. If a casual taxable person, sorry, it is not causal taxable person, it is casual taxable person. Okay, so in case of casual taxable person who is applying for registration, and when he gets a temporary registration number, he gets that number for making an advance deposit of tax in his electronic cash ledger. Okay, so after this particular process only, an acknowledgement will be issued to this particular person. So in case of casual taxable person applying for registration gets a temporary registration number, and with that number he shall make an advance deposit of tax in his electronic cash ledger, and after meeting this particular step only he will be received an acknowledgement. Okay, then uh, he received an acknowledgement, he submitted an electronic application, then in response he received an acknowledgement, and this application shall be forwarded to the proper officer. So the proper officer is the person who checks every documents to see that everything is in proper form, and he inspects, and if he want to inspect the physical place of business of the person, he may do that also. The procedure after receipt of application by the proper officer is depicted in the next slide. I hope this is clear for you. So the first step begins. Proper officer examines the application and accompanying documents, and if all the documents are found to be in order, and if the proper officer is okay with all the documents, every documents are in order, then the next step follows. That is, the proper officer will grant registration certificate in form GST REG 06. So the granting of registration is done within a period of 3 working days. So if all the documents are well and good, the registration will be granted within 3 days from the date of submission of application. Okay, and after giving it granting registration, the registration certificate will be granted in form GST REG 06. Okay, then what happens if all the documents are not in a proper order? In that case, the proper officer issues a particular notice electronically within 3 working days from the application date, in which he will ask for clarification. That means clarification means correction of certain particulars which are already declared, like certain documents or certain documents attached with the application. So he may ask for clarification and also for correcting those information. Okay, so that notice will be issued within 3 working days. And after that, if the applicant has furnished the clarification properly, that means information or documents within 7 working days from receipt of notice, if everything is done properly and if the proper officer is satisfied with it, then he may be granted registration within 7 working days from the date of receipt of information or clarification. Okay, and if the proper officer is not satisfied, the proper officer will reject the application and will ask for reasons to be recorded in writing. So this is the process or procedure after submitting the application and after the application is received by the proper officer. And here now we have deemed approval of application. That means in normal cases, the application will be received by the proper officer, and that particular person or the liable person will be granted registration within 3 working days if the documents are proper. Okay, or if the documents are not in a proper order, the proper officer may issue a notice, um, and after that, after making all the clarifications by the liable person, if the documents are proper, he may be granted registration within 7 working days. So these two are the time limit for granting registration. So if there is no communication from the proper officer within 3 working days from the date of submission of application, or within 7 working days from the date of receipt of clarification, if there is no proper communication or if the proper officer fails to take any action, then the application will be granted and it will be mentioned as deemed approval of application. The application for grant of registration shall be deemed to have been approved. Okay. And then physical verification. So physical verification, I pointed out in the earlier slide. That means if the proper officer is satisfied that the physical verification of the place of business of the registered person is required after the grant of registration, he can go for that physical verification also, and he will prepare a verification report along with other documents which may include photographs, and these all documents shall be uploaded in the prescribed format in the GST common portal. Okay. And this is regarding issuance of registration certificate, that we already discussed, that issuance of registration certificate will be done by the proper officer if when he finds that the registration is approved, and the proper officer signs the registration and he verifies it, and it will be issued in form GST REG06, and this will be available to the applicant in the common portal, and thus a GST IN, that is a GST identification number, will be communicated to the applicant within 3 days after the grant of registration. Okay. Then these are the effective dates of registration. So if an applicant submits an application within 30 days from the day he becomes liable to registration, then the effective date of registration shall be the date on which he becomes liable to registration. So if a particular person becomes liable to registration on 19th August 2020, from that date, with effect from that date, the registration is said to have happened. Okay. Then after 30 days from the date he becomes liable to registration, so in that case the date of grant of registration shall be considered as the effective date of registration. Okay. So these are the common provisions with regards to the procedures for registration. We had a brief idea and overall idea regarding section 25, and please go through this video and understand the concepts. Read the concepts carefully and try to understand the meaning. In the coming videos we will have detailed discussion about each of the steps like application, verification, approval, amendment, cancellation, etc. Thank you.